The air in the refrigerated section of Costco always felt like a premonition, sterile, biting, and smelling faintly of industrial cleanser and cardboard. I moved my cart with a mechanical precision that had become my only comfort in the 6 months since the funeral. Grief, I had discovered, wasn't a sudden storm. It was a slow, rising tide of gray that washed the color out of everything. I buried my husband, Walter, on a rainy Tuesday in August. We laid him in an Italian marble crypt that cost $90,000. A final, opulent house for a man who had built a construction empire from nothing. I had stood there, draped in black silk that felt like lead, watching the heavy stone slab seal away 43 years of my life. I had cried until my tear ducts felt like scorched earth. I had learned to sleep on only one side of our king-sized bed, clutching a pillow that had long since lost the scent of his cologne. Then came yesterday. It was 2:15 p.m. The store was crowded with suburban families and retirees stocking up on bulk goods. I was reaching for a bottle of premium olive oil, the kind Walter used to insist on for his Sunday dressings, when I saw him. First, it was just a silhouette. A man standing 10 feet away in the aisle of canned goods. His back to me. He was wearing a faded Green Bay Packers t-shirt and worn-out jeans. My heart gave a small, painful hitch. Walter had been a fanatic for the Packers, but he would never have been caught dead in public wearing something so tattered. Walter was a man of crisp button-downs and polished loafers. The man reached up to grab a large can of pinto beans. The movement was fluid, practiced. And then, he tilted his head to the side to check the price tag. My breath died in my throat. Tilt. That specific, inquisitive angle of the head. I knew that movement better than I knew the rhythm of my own breathing. "No," I whispered, the word lost in the hum of the industrial coolers. "It's not possible." My hand began to shake. The glass bottle of olive oil slipped through my fingers. It hit the white linoleum with a sickening crack. Shards of glass sprayed across my shoes, and a pool of golden oil began to spread, shimmering under the harsh fluorescent lights. Several shoppers turned to look. An employee nearby sighed and started toward the mess. I didn't blink. I didn't apologize. I was focused entirely on the man. He turned at the sound of the crash. The world didn't just stop. It fractured. Time became a thick, viscous liquid that I had to fight through. Behind the man, a wall of stacked tomato soup cans seemed to vibrate with an unnatural intensity. It was him. It wasn't a resemblance. It wasn't a look-alike. It was the man I had lived with for over 4 decades. I saw the scar on his left eyebrow, the one he got when he fell off his motorcycle at 20, a story he'd told 1,000 times to make me laugh. I saw the slightly crooked nose, broken in a bar fight in his youth that he always claimed he won, though I knew better. Most damning of all was the small, comma-shaped birthmark on the side of his neck. It was a mark I had kissed every night for 43 years. "Walter," said. My voice was a strangled rasp. He looked at me, and for a fraction of a second, a heartbeat so short it could have been an illusion, I saw it. A flicker of sheer, cold terror in his eyes. A flash of recognition that was instantly smoothed over by a mask of polite, distant confusion. My legs moved on their own. I was 68 years old, but in that moment, the adrenaline made me feel 20. I lunged toward him, my shoes splashing through the spilled oil, nearly slipping. I didn't care about the mess or the stares. "Walter. My God, Walter, you're alive." I reached for his arm, my fingers desperate to feel the warmth of his skin, to prove that he wasn't a ghost, that the crypt in the cemetery was empty. He stepped back. It wasn't a casual movement. It was a tactical retreat. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said. The voice hit me like a physical blow to the chest. It was his voice, the deep, gravelly baritone that had argued with me about the lawn, that had cheered at Mark's graduation, that had whispered to me in the dark of our bedroom. But it was cold, professional, remote. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else," he continued. His tone calm and paternal, the way one speaks to a confused child. "Mistaken you?" I was hysterical now, tears finally breaking through. "I am Helen. I am your wife of 43 years. Walter, look at me. How can you stand there and say that?" People were stopping their carts now, forming a semicircle of pitying gazes. I could hear the whispers. "Poor lady. She's lost it. Grief does strange things to the elderly."
Please," he sighed, his eyes scanning the crowd, looking for an exit. "My name is Robert Miller. I live over on the west side. I've never seen you before in my life." "You are lying," I screamed, fumbling for my purse. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone. I swiped frantically, my vision blurred by tears, until I found it, a photo from his last birthday, just weeks before the accident. I shoved the screen toward his face. "Look, that's us. That's the same shirt you're wearing in the photo. Walter, you're wearing the same watch." He looked at the screen. His jaw tightened, a telltale sign of his anger that I knew instinctively. But his voice remained steady. "It's a remarkable resemblance. I'll grant you that. But that isn't me. You're clearly going through a very difficult time. Maybe you should sit down. I'll call an employee to help you." "Your finger," I whispered, my voice dropping to a low, jagged hiss. I pointed to his left hand, which was gripping the handle of his cart. "Show me your left hand." He hesitated. For the first time, his composure wavered. He tried to tuck his hand into his pocket, but I grabbed his wrist. I was stronger than I looked, fueled by a primal, righteous fury. I pulled his hand into the light. There it was. The crooked pinky finger. He had broken it when he was 15, trying to fix his mother's roof. It had never set right. It was his signature imperfection. "Robert Miller doesn't have a broken pinky in the exact same spot as Walter Peterson," I sighed, my voice trembling with a mixture of horror and hope. He wrenched his hand away from me. The mask slipped for a second, and Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam a glimpse of the man I knew, not the loving husband, but the ruthless businessman who had crushed his competitors. "I have to go," he sighed curtly. He did look at me again. He pushed his cart past the spilled oil, moving with a speed that bordered on a run. "Walter, don't you walk away from me." I tried to follow, but the store employee finally reached me, clutching a firm, courteous hand on my shoulder. You've had a fall. You're bleeding a little from the glass. Let's get you to a chair." "Get off me." I barked, but he did let go. By the time I wrenched myself free, the man in the Packer shirt was gone. He had vanished into the maze of the checkout lines. I stood in the middle of the aisle, the scent of olive oil heavy in the air, my heart a cold stone in my chest. I wasn't crazy. I knew my husband's skin. I knew his bonus. I knew his lies. I did go to the manager. I did go to the police. Instead, I walked out to the parking lot, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I sat in my Honda Civic, the last gift he'd ever given me, and I waited. 10 minutes later, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam him. He exited the store carrying 2 plastic bags. He did look like a man who had just had a confusing encounter with a stranger. He looked like a man who was fleeing a crime scene. He hopped into a battered, salt-roasted blue Ford Taurus. I started my engine. My hands were steady now. The grief that had paralyzed me for 6 months was gone, replaced by something far more potent. Fury. As he pulled out of the parking lot to follow the blue car, one thought repeated in my mind like a funeral bell. I buried a man 6 months ago. I paid for the service. I chose the music, and I kissed the cold marble of his tomb. If Walter is in that car, then who is rotting in my husband's grave?
The blue Ford Taurus moved through the afternoon traffic with a calculated sluggishness, as if the driver were trying to blend into the very asphalt of the city. I trailed 3 cars behind, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. Every time his brake lights flared, my heart skipped a beat. I was terrified he would notice me, yet more terrified that he would disappear into the labyrinth of side streets and leave me alone with my haunting questions. We drove away from the manicured lawns of our neighborhood, away from the glass and steel skyline where Walter's construction firm held court, and drifted toward the west side. This was a part of the city Walter used to dismiss as transient, a place of peeling paint, gravel driveways, and families living paycheck to paycheck. He turned onto a quiet cul-de-sac called Willow Lane. I pulled over to the curb half a block away, dousing my headlights even though the sun was still a bruised orange on the horizon. I watched him get out of the car. He didn't walk like a man who had just seen a ghost. He walked like a man coming home from a long day at the office. He grabbed the grocery bags from the back seat, the pinto beans, the cereal, the mundane staples of a life I wasn't part of. Then the front door of a small seafoam greenhouse opened. A woman stepped out onto the porch. She looked to be in her late 50s, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail, wearing an apron smeared with what looked like flour. She smiled, not the polite, strained smile of a neighbor, but the radiant, effortless smile of a woman looking at the center of her universe. Walter, Robert, I reminded myself with a jolt of nausea, met her halfway up the path. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a chaste peck. It was a familiar, lingering kiss. My stomach lurched. That was the kiss he used to give me when he came home from his business trips, to Chicago or Dallas. Then, the air was filled with the high-pitched squeals of children. 2 kids, a boy about 8 and a girl maybe 10, exploded through the front door. "Grandpa! Grandpa, did you get the ice cream?" Walter let out a booming laugh, the same deep, resonant sound that used to fill our living room during Christmas dinner. He hoisted the boy onto his shoulder and ruffled the girl's hair. "Of course I did. Would I ever forget?" They disappeared inside, the door clicking shut with a finality that felt like a tombstone being lowered. I sat in the dark interior of my car, my breath hitching in my throat. The afternoon sun streamed through the windshield, warming my face, but I felt like I was made of ice. 43 years of marriage. 43 years of building a life, a business, and a family with our son Mark. 6 months of mourning, of clutching his sweaters to my face to catch the fading scent of his skin. And he was here. Alive. He had a whole second world. He had grandchildren I never knew existed. He had a woman who called him Robert, and slept in his bed while I spent $120,000 on his final resting place. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking so much I almost dropped it. I began taking photos. The house, car, the license plate, MZK 38847. I zoomed in on the window where a warm yellow light had just flickered on. I could see them through the curtains, a silhouette of a happy family sitting down to dinner. I waited until the streetlights hummed to life. I waited until my legs felt cramped and my eyes burned. I needed to see more. I needed a reason to believe I was wrong, even though every fiber of my being knew I was right. Around 8 p.m. the woman, Claudia, I would later learn, came out to move a sprinkler on the lawn. She looked happy, settled. There was no grief in her eyes, no shadow of a husband who had died 6 months ago. She was living in a reality where Robert Miller was a devoted grandfather and a retired mechanic. I drove home on autopilot, the streets a blur of neon and shadow. When I pulled into my driveway, the massive 5-bedroom Tudor house I had shared with Walter looked like a hollowed-out shell. It was too big, too quiet, too full of expensive things that meant absolutely nothing. I went straight to the den. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in Walter's leather armchair, the one he'd claimed was the only place a man can think, and I opened my laptop. I began with the obituary. Walter T. Peterson, 70, beloved husband and father, tragic victim of a high-speed collision on Route 42. I looked at the police report I had saved in a digital folder. Vehicle engulfed in flames. Identification confirmed by dental records and personal effects found on the remains. Remains. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. The casket had been sealed. The funeral director, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Henderson, had been very insistent. The damage was extensive, Mrs. Peterson. It's better to remember him as he was. I had listened. I had trusted. I had been the good widow, the one who didn't cause a scene, the one who signed the papers and paid the bills. But Walter was a builder. He knew how to create structures from the ground up. And apparently, he knew how to dismantle them just as easily. I spent the rest of the night digging. I bypassed the official records and went into our private finances. We were wealthy. Millions in construction assets, real estate, and a heavy investment portfolio. But as I scrolled through the months leading up to the accident, I saw it. Small jagged holes in our net worth. 10,000 here. 50,000 there. Transferred to shell companies with names like Blue Sky Consulting and Ridgeview Logistics. At the time I'd ignored it, thinking Walter was just moving money for a new project. He'd always handled the boring stuff. In total, nearly $2 million had vanished in the year before his death. My heart hammered. $2 million. The exact amount of a life insurance policy he had taken out 3 years ago, naming our son Mark as the secondary beneficiary if I were to pass. But the primary payout had gone to me. I checked the insurance payout. $3 million had been deposited into my account 4 months ago. I had barely touched it. I had been too busy grieving to care about the money. Then, a thought hit me like a physical blow. A realization so cold it made my teeth chatter. Walter didn't just run away. He didn't just fake his death to be with another woman. He had committed a crime. Identity fraud. Insurance fraud. And God knows what else. But he couldn't have done it alone. To fake dental records. To swap a body. To ensure the police report was closed quickly without an autopsy. That required help. It required someone inside the system. Or someone inside the family. Thought of Mark. Our only son. Mark had been the one to handle the police. Mark had been the one to talk to the medical examiner. Mark had been the one who took me by the shoulders at the funeral home and whispered, "Don't look, Mom. Just remember him smiling." Picked up my phone. It was 3 a.m. I looked at the photos I had taken of the seafoam greenhouse. Then I looked at the photo of Mark at the funeral. His face a mask of performative sorrow. I realized then that I wasn't just mourning a husband. I was mourning a son I didn't even know. I sat back in the chair, the darkness of the room pressing in on me. Had 2 choices. I could go to the police tomorrow, report the fraud, and watch my life, and Mark's life, turn into a heap of legal ash. Or I could play their game. I reached out and touched the gold wedding band on my finger. Felt like a handcuff. "You think I'm a weak old woman, Walter," I whispered into the silence of the room. "You think I'm the one who needs a monthly allowance and a nice chair to sit in while I wait for the end." I stood up, my joints popping, my resolve hardening into something sharp and dangerous. "But you forgot one thing. I'm the one who helped you build that company. I'm the one who knows where all the bodies are buried." I walked to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. I wasn't going to sleep. I had a lot of work to do. And the first thing on my list was a visit to my son. I wanted to see the look on his face when I told him I'd seen a ghost at Costco. The morning air was thick with a biting fog as I drove toward the prestigious office of Peterson Construction. This was the empire Walter had built, a monument of glass, steel, and ambition. Since the death, our son Mark had taken the helm. He had stepped into his father's shoes with a grace that I had once found comforting, but now it felt chilling. I bypassed the receptionist with a curt nod, ignoring her protests. I pushed open the double oak doors to the executive suite without knocking. Mark was sitting behind the massive mahogany desk that had belonged to his father. He was looking at a set of blueprints, a silver pen balanced between his fingers. He looked up, startled, his face breaking into a mask of filial concern. "Mom, what are you doing here? It's barely 9 in the morning. Is everything okay?" I didn't sit down. I walked to the window, looking out at the cranes on the horizon. "I saw your father yesterday, Mark." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind of silence that precedes a building's collapse. I didn't turn around. I waited. "Mom," Mark said, his voice soft, coated in that patronizing layer of pity he'd used for months. "We've talked about this. The grief. It plays tricks. You're seeing resemblances where there are none. Maybe we should increase your sessions with Dr. Eris." I saw the scar, Mark. I saw the broken pinky. I saw the birthmark on his neck that I used to kiss every night for 40 years. I turned around then, my eyes boring into his. And then I followed him home. To a seafoam green house on Willow Lane. To a woman named Claudia and 2 children who call him Grandpa. Mark's hand, the one holding the silver pen, began to tremble. Just a fraction, but it was there. He tried to maintain the mask, but the corners of his mouth twitched. "Mom, you're sounding unwell. This is bordering on a delusion. Stop lying to me." I slammed my purse onto the desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "I have the photos. I have the license plate. And I have the bank records of the $2 million that vanished from the company accounts in the year before the accident." Mark didn't move. He looked at the purse as if it contained a bomb. Slowly, he leaned back in the chair, the concerned son persona melting away to reveal something sharper, colder, and far more like his father. "How much do you know?" he asked. His voice had lost its warmth. It was flat, professional. The confirmation hit me harder than the discovery itself. A part of me, the mother part, had been desperately hoping he would prove me wrong. "Enough to know that you helped him. You handled the medical examiner. You ensured the casket stayed closed. You pocketed the inheritance and the insurance payout while I sat in the dark and contemplated suicide because I couldn't imagine a world without him." Mark stood up, walking to the door and locking it. He turned back to me, his jaw set. "He was miserable, Mom. For 25 years, he was trapped in this life. He met Claudia on a trip to the coast and she gave him something you couldn't. Peace. Peace." I spat the word. "He had a wife. He had a life. And you helped him buy a corpse. Who is in that grave, Mark? Whose family is wondering why their father never came home?" "A drifter," Mark said dismissively, waving a hand as if he were talking about a discarded piece of lumber. "He was terminal. No family. No one to miss him. Dad gave him $50,000 for his only niece. And in exchange, he died as Walter Peterson. It was a victimless crime, Mom. A victimless crime. I am the victim. I spent 6 months in a living hell. You got the house. You got $3 million in insurance." Mark stepped toward me, his eyes flashing with a sudden, ugly greed. If he had stayed and asked for a divorce, the lawyers would have shredded this company. You would have taken half of everything. The stores, the assets, the reputation. I would have inherited a ghost of a business. This way everyone won. He got his new life, I got the company. And you got to be the wealthy, respected widow. I looked at my son, the boy I had nursed, the man I had championed, and I felt a profound sense of failure. You traded your father's soul and my sanity for a construction company. I secured our legacy, he countered. And if you're smart, you'll keep your mouth shut. If the truth comes out, the insurance company will sue you for every cent of that $3 million. The state will seize the house as part of a fraud investigation. You'll end up in a prison cell at 70, Mom. Is that the justice you want? He reached out to touch my arm, but I recoiled as if he were a serpent. You think I care about the money? I whispered. I've spent 43 years being the good wife. I've spent my life building your father up and smoothing your path. You both think I'm just a piece of furniture in this empire." I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" Mark's voice was laced with a new, sharp edge of panic. "I'm going to see my lawyer," I said, my voice as hard as the marble crypt I'd bought for a stranger. "But not the one who handles the company. I'm going to someone who specializes in what you've actually become. Mom, don't be a fool. You'll destroy yourself along with us." I turned back at the door, a cold, thin smile on my lips. "Oh, Mark, you forgot one thing. I'm already 68. I've already lived through the worst thing you could do to me. I have nothing left to lose. But you and your father, you have everything to lose." I walked out of the office, the sound of my heels clicking on the marble floor sounding like a countdown. As I reached the elevator, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had searched for the night before. "Law offices of Simone Wright," a voice answered. "I need to report a murder," I said, my voice steady. "Not of a person but of a life. And I'd like to start with a full audit of Peterson construction." The war had begun. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't playing the role of the peacemaker. I was the storm. The air in the law offices of Simone Wright was cool and smelled of expensive paper and fresh espresso, a sharp contrast to the suffocating rot of my personal life. Simone was a woman who didn't just practice law. She wielded it like a scalpel. She listened to my story for 3 hours, her face a mask of professional stillness, while the digital recorder on her desk drank in every word of Mark's confession that I had secretly captured on my phone. "This isn't just a family dispute, Helen," Simone said, leaning back in her leather chair. "This is a federal cocktail of identity fraud, insurance racketeering, and the desecration of human remains. If we pull this thread, the entire tapestry of the Peterson name will unravel." "Good," I said, my voice like flint. "Pull it until there's nothing left." The following week was a blur of tactical strikes. Under Simone's guidance, we filed a secret motion to freeze all of Walter's, or rather, Robert Miller's, newly established accounts. We tracked the $2 million he had siphoned away. It was sitting in a conservative fund, waiting for him to retire in peace while I lived on the allowance Mark had graciously offered me. But the final blow was delivered in person. I waited until Friday evening. I knew the routine now. Robert, Walter, would be in his small workshop in the backyard of the seafoam greenhouse, tinkering with a broken lawnmower, pretending to be the simple man he never was. I didn't sneak this time. I walked up the driveway, my heels crunching on the gravel. Claudia was in the kitchen. I could see her through the window, humming as she set the table for a family dinner. I walked past the house to the shed. Walter looked up as I stepped into the doorway. The light from a single swinging bulb cast long, distorted shadows across his face. He froze, a wrench in his hand. "Helen," he whispered. The name sounded like a confession. "It's over, Walter," I said, tossing a thick blue folder onto his workbench. It contained the frozen account notices, the copies of the shell company transfers, and a draft of the criminal complaint. "Simone Wright has already filed the petition to annul your death certificate. By Monday, you will legally be Walter Peterson again. A living man and a wanted one." He looked at the folder as if it were a poisonous snake. "You'll go down too. The insurance money. I've already returned it," I lied. Or rather, I had placed it in a judicial trust account, effectively washing my hands of the blood money. "I don't care about the house. I don't care about the company. I care about the truth. And the truth is that you and Mark are going to spend the next decade in a cell for what you did." A sob broke from his throat, a sound of a man watching his world vanish. "I just wanted to be free, Helen." "You were free," I snapped. "You were free for 43 years to be an honest man. You chose this." I turned and walked away, ignoring his pleas. As I reached my car, I saw the front door of the house open. Claudia stepped out looking confused. She saw Walter slumped in the shed, and then she saw me. I didn't say a word. I just drove. The fallout was swift. Mark was arrested at his office on Tuesday morning. The image of him being let out in handcuffs, his face hidden by his blazer, was on the front page of every local paper. The construction prince was a fraud. Walter surrendered 2 days later. He couldn't run. He had no money, no identity, and nowhere to go. Claudia had kicked him out the moment she realized her Robert was a phantom built on the bones of another woman's husband. 6 months later, I stood in the cemetery. The $90,000 Italian marble crypt was open. A small, nondescript van was parked nearby. 2 men in suits were carefully removing the remains of the man I had mourned, the stranger who had finally been identified as Thomas Reed, a man whose niece was now receiving a proper settlement from the Peterson estate. I had the marble slab replaced. The new one was simple, gray, and bore no name. It only had a date and a single sentence: "The truth shall set you free." I was no longer the Peterson widow. I had reclaimed my maiden name. I had sold the Tudor mansion and bought a small apartment overlooking the harbor. It was quiet. It was mine. Mark called me from prison once. He tried to apologize again, tried to talk about the stress and the pressure. Hung up. Some betrayals are too deep for the bridge of an apology to cross. I sat on my new balcony, a glass of wine in my hand, watching the sunset. My phone buzzed with a message from Simone. The final audit was complete. After the fines and the legal fees, I was still a very wealthy woman. But for the first time, the money didn't feel heavy. It felt like a tool for a new life, rather than a cage for an old one. I looked out at the ocean, thinking of the stranger I had buried, the husband I had lost, and the son I had given up. The grief was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but the fog had finally lifted. I had buried my husband 6 months ago. But today I finally buried the lie. And for the first time in 43 years I could breathe.